Thank you for downloading the Fully Charged Show podcast. Now, if you're new to this channel, we would really love it if you were to subscribe. I know that if you already subscribed, this is annoying. Sorry about that. But for those people who haven't, then please do subscribe and please tell your friends about the Fully Charged Show podcast. But we really want to do a big thank you to all our Patreon supporters who, without your help, we wouldn't be able to put on the live events, we wouldn't do the podcasts, we couldn't even do our YouTube channel. It would be silent and like a big black, deep black nothingness, a void, a total void of content. Imagine a world with a total void of content. It'd be terrible. So if you'd like to support us, please feel free to check out the link to the Patreon to the Patreon thing, the Patreon page in the show notes. Now, I'm going to get professional now, because on this episode, we return to our features talks at Fully Charged Live, which was held on June the 6th to the 9th, 2019, this year. And in particular, this talk, which I wanted our wider audience to hear, is really interesting. The title is Can Batteries Really Be Ethical, Recyclable and Sustainable? And our panel was absolutely brilliant. It consisted of Simon Moores from Benchmark Minerals and Mark Newman from Bernstein. Now, a quick sidebar before we begin. When we get to the Q&A bit right at the end, the audio isn't really that good. In fact, it's a total disaster. So you can hear the answers that our panelists gave, but you can't hear the questions which came from the members of the audience. So what we've done is we've hired some of the best voice actors in the business. Okay, it's our production crew, to revoice exactly what the people who asked the questions said, which is very unfortunate for the people who asked the questions, because they could have heard their own voices, except they wouldn't. All they'd hear is which wouldn't have been good. So we've re-recorded them, so it's all nice and clear for you. I hope you enjoy it. We're now going to talk about batteries. And as we all know, most people here will know that these are, essentially the most boring thing in the world is a battery, because it's just a box and you look at it and nothing happens. It doesn't have pistons or chromium bit trim or anything, it's just a battery. But we want to know, are they ethical, recyclable and sustainable? These are the big questions that are often asked about electric vehicles. So I'm going to be joined by two people who actually know stuff and who are very, very clever. Please welcome onto the stage Simon Moores from Benchmark Minerals Intelligence and Mark Newman from Bernstein. Simon, can we start with you? Can you explain, because I came across what both of you do earlier this year at an amazing conference. Can you explain what Benchmark does?
Yeah, so we're an independent publishing company, and we spend our time collecting data, market data from the mine, the lithium, graphite or cobalt mine, all the way through to the battery cell.
So you kind of know the whole picture of that journey of how a battery is made, effectively.
We travel the world to go to the lithium mines, cobalt mines, where they make the batteries, and then we also deal with the electric car companies that are buying the batteries, so yeah.
And then Bernstein, what do Bernstein do?
So I work at Bernstein, I'm based in Hong Kong. Bernstein is headquarters in New York. It's a financial institution advising investors on which companies, which stocks essentially to invest in. I cover technology. I've been focusing on batteries, electric vehicles, and also semiconductors as well. We've been writing these Electric Revolution Black Books, which I think we gave to Robert one recently in March. It's about 450-page worth report.
It's quite heavy. Some of you may have heard me dropping it on the Fully Charged podcast, because we wanted to capture the sound of how big how can we express how big this report is? So we dropped it on a table and it's an impressive work, and I have ploughed through a lot of it, but I have to say my level of data absorption ability is limited. But it's clearly very, very comprehensive study of the whole topic. So there are 72 super battery plants either in operation or being built at the moment. So they're in the pipeline. I mean, do you think that's going to make a big difference? Because a lot of the hit stuff we're hearing is we can't make the cars because there's a battery shortage. I mean, that's being addressed, I'm assuming?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going through this era, this last 2 years. We call it at Benchmark the rise of the battery mega factory. So what's happening is battery plants around the world are going from a small plant that would make batteries for your mobile phones to an order of magnitude bigger, these supersized battery plants like the Tesla Gigafactory in Nevada. What's happened the last 2 years, everyone wants to build batteries at a massive scale never seen before. And actually, since I sent you that email, that was 72 battery plants. We now have 78 of these battery mega factories in the pipeline by 2028, over the next 10 years. And at the moment, if all of those come on stream, that will make about 25 million electric vehicles. So not that many, if you think about the global size of it. But it's happening, is the point.
Right. God, all those factories can only supply enough batteries to make 25, because I mean 25 million electric vehicles, if they all arrived here now, that would be a lot. But there's more than that. There's more than 25 million combustion cars on the road in this UK now, isn't there? I mean, there's...
Yeah. I mean, huge amount, right? And
it's 100 million cars sold per year globally.
Right.
I mean, another key number to throw out there. So Simon's talking about the battery factories that are being built. If you look at how much production capacity today in the battery industry, it's around 300 gigawatt hours per year. In order to electrify all of those 100 million per year, you need about 7,000 gigawatt hours. And the entire installed base today is only capable of providing 300, 350. So, it's a huge effort and a huge amount of more capital expenditure to get anywhere close to even 50% penetration of electric vehicles.
Right. So that's kind of the chilling side of it. I mean, I think the interesting thing that I picked up from you is about them, because a lot of people will say we'll run out of the materials that we need to make these batteries, and that was a very interesting thing to come to your conference and hear. Well, can you tell us, are we going to run out?
I think Simon...
Yes, that's more your...
I took all the batteries, you do it.
We are absolutely not going to run out of any of the raw materials that go into a lithium-ion battery. There's enough in the ground. There's enough knowledge to get that out of the ground and get it into a lithium-ion battery cell. The issue is the scaling of the supply chain. So it's will those materials arrive on time for the aggressive plans of the automotive companies? The answer is no, they won't. So the next 10 years will be bumpy, but we're going from producing lithium at 300,000 tons a year to needing 1 million tons a year in a 7-year period. So that's never happened in commodities ever anyway, that level of growth. Whether you look at coal or iron ore or all of this, that actual scaling in a short period of time is unprecedented.
Right.
And that's the challenge.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the problem is the ramp of the supply. I totally agree. I don't think there's any major long-term shortage, but in the short term there are going to be some kind of bottlenecks, and the benefit of that, if you're a supplier, is if you are producing the commodity or the battery that is the bottleneck, typically your prices go up, and so that's a good thing for those companies making those cobalt, lithium, or the battery suppliers. I mean, I'm also of the view that battery supply, in order to get to that 7,000, it's not going to happen within a decade.
Right.
But I think demand will flip quite quickly in the early to mid 2020s towards electric vehicles, and the industry will have difficulty keeping up. So I think from that perspective, there is potentially going to be some bottlenecks in the supply chain from battery suppliers, potentially also upstream in some of the materials makers. But that's a great opportunity if you're a battery maker.
Yeah.
Good opportunity to make more money, essentially.
So a lot of incentive to invest in that sense.
Exactly.
I mean,
and the way I view it is we're going through. It started 2 years ago. It's going to last another 5 years. We're going through this supply chain build out, or let's say they're building out the blueprint for the 21st century automotive industry, which is essentially what electric vehicles will be. And this next 5 years will define the next 30 in terms of where the raw materials come from, where they're processed, where the batteries are made, and ultimately where those cars are built. So that's kind of the way I view it in my head.
Right. So, and the other big issue, which I mean, it was highlighted for me at a conference in Norway recently, where one of the speakers was from Amnesty International. In fact, one of the people who penned the report about artisanal mining in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which was a really important thing. And he was really fascinating because he also said it stipulated the percentage of cobalt that is mined in that way, and it is minuscule. The fact is, it still happens, and it is, beyond ethics. It goes into a whole other realm of horror. That there are children working in those areas, and there are kids doing it. But it isn't. I think the two things he said that I thought were interesting is, one, there's more cobalt in most of it is for phones and laptops rather than cars at the moment, and also then there was a lot of discussion around cobalt-free batteries, or where we use very much less cobalt in the battery chemistry. I mean, presumably this is a topic you discussed. I mean, the cobalt issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, on the cobalt content, I'll let Simon talk about the mining and some of the child labour issues more. I mean, from my perspective, I think what clearly is happening is you are going to lower cobalt content. Cobalt-free is possible as well, but that comes with challenges. So there are some different battery chemistries that have no cobalt in at all. The difficulty with that typically is lower energy density, some of those alternatives. And some of the other approaches to using very, very low cobalt quantities, such as what Tesla is doing, are effectively a little bit more dangerous. Right. And so some of what we're seeing from the German car OEMs is they're much, much more conservative in what they use. So a German electric vehicle would use a little bit more cobalt than, for example, a Tesla. Right. Because their choice is the cobalt tends to stabilize the chemistry a little bit, and so it makes it a little bit less explosive. But the trend absolutely is, compared to how much cobalt you have per unit of energy in your phone to a Tesla, the trend is definitely down in terms of how much cobalt you need.
And I'm just wondering, is there the case that because of the sort of ethical contention of getting materials from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there are other cobalt supplies on the planet? Is it encouraging people to go and try and get some from somewhere else?
Yeah, it's encouraged exploration elsewhere in the world, but the problem is the way the geological deposits of cobalt are dispersed around the world. You can at the moment only get it from scale from the DRC. Right. So if you're scaling the electric vehicle industry, you've got to sort the DRC cobalt problem out. But the reality is, as you mentioned, Robert, only a tiny amount of cobalt that's mined in the DRC is actually the illegal child labour cobalt. For example, I've got some numbers for you. If people like stats, I've got some numbers. So 130,000 tons of cobalt is produced a year. 70% is from the DRC, of which 15% is artisanal, and artisanal doesn't mean illegal, and of which about 10% of that 15% is child labour related.
Right.
So that's about 2,000 to 3,000 tons a year of the 130,000 ton pie.
Right.
So the issue isn't the supply of cobalt coming from child labour, the issue is optics. It's not a good look for Tesla or Apple if your car or phone has got child labour associated cobalt in there, and that's the real issue for cobalt, really.
Yeah. So then I suppose the key question is what you see as the next. Is there a battery chemistry or battery design with different materials that is in the pipeline that is even in the foreseeable 5 to 10 year period? Are you aware of any other technologies that are maybe not lithium ion?
So there are lots of new developments that are going on in battery chemistry, solid state batteries that have no liquid electrolyte. I think a lot of companies see that as the nirvana of batteries, and pretty much every battery company has a project looking at this. I don't think it's going to be anything that's going to have a major impact on car-sized electric vehicles for the next, definitely not 5, probably not even 10 years, but it's going to happen nevertheless in other devices, because the problem is with these new chemistries, they're typically more expensive at first, and so they're more likely to appear in a phone or a drone or something that has a higher willingness to pay per unit of energy. If you think about the battery that's in your phone, it's $5, $6, $7, and so if you're doubling the cost of that, $5 extra for your iPhone, not a big deal, but your Tesla battery, $10,000 at least for a car battery, doubling that's a pretty big deal for a car.
Yeah.
So I think so those chemistries that are being looked at, solid state is one. Silicon anode is another one. I think silicon anode is actually already happening. You're starting to, rather than what they typically use, which is a pure carbon or graphite anode, they're starting to blend it with more and more silicon, and I think that's going to increase much, much more. What the benefit of that is high energy density, so you get more energy per kilogram of weight, plus potentially faster charging as well.
Right.
So there are a lot of things being worked at. Those are the two, I think, that I would point out as the most obvious that are going to make a big impression in the next 10 years in this industry.
It's important to know, what does Cobalt do in a battery right now? So it's actually a big safety element to the battery. It stabilizes it. So taking Cobalt out means you increase the risk of fire.
So our battery would still work with no cobalt.
It would still work,
but it might blow up.
Exactly. So what looks worse, cobalt from the DRC or your car blowing up?
Yeah.
Choose your poison in that sense. But the reality is that cobalt is being reduced. For us, it will never be engineered out of a lithium-ion battery in the foreseeable future. It's just going to be reduced. They call it an NCM 811, which is increasing nickel, decreasing cobalt. That's the trend, and I really think that will continue.
But in a similar way to, I used to always hear we're going to run out of lithium for all your fancy electric cars. It's the other materials, so like nickel, copper, all the other materials, not necessarily in the battery, but in the construction of an electric car uses much more copper and all that. I mean, what about those materials? Because I'm sure there's some ethical concerns about, anything you dig out of the ground and you leave a big hole, there's issues. I mean, what about the other materials? Because nickel you just mentioned then. But.
For me, when you're mining stuff out of the ground and you're mining in let's say, it could be Africa or South America or even China, there are going to be issues surrounding it. The DRC cobalt child labour one is the highest profile, but when you mine graphite out of the ground in China, you have air quality issues, you have acids that are used to produce this that are being dumped in the local river, but China is cracking down on that quite a bit. And for lithium, you have water issues, for example, because a lot of it's from a brine in South America. It takes a lot of water to actually, like fresh water issues to process that. You're taking that away from the local villages in the Atacama Desert. So these are the challenges that some of the raw materials are facing. But I would say none of them are critical. None of them are like you're mining oil from tar sands in Canada or something like this. These are not, in the scheme of mining, they're actually standard issues that the companies are dealing with.
I think what you're seeing is these are teething pain issues for the industry, and they're getting more attention, and there's nothing that I can see that can't be fixed.
Right.
And you can see, like, not just on the car supply chain, but even Apple, their big focus now on confirming that the entire supply chain is ethical.
Right.
There's none of the cobalt in the iPhone uses, child labor, and I think Tesla, Volkswagen, all these other car companies are going to have to do the same.
Yeah.
And so it's inevitable that these kind of issues we're hearing about are going to be fixed. And
I mean, I think it's also because when I was talking about it once, someone said, it just gave me a web address, which was the history of the Niger Delta. Which is a big oil extraction area, and which I kind of knew some of it. I knew that there'd been murders and there'd been, political pressure. I mean, it's not a pretty history. Mm-hmm. The oil industry's legacy is not exactly, they didn't go around the world being really benign and looking after local villagers while they drilled up their land, So, but I mean, what we should learn from that is, can we do something now on an industrial global level that doesn't do that? I think that's part of the ethics of what a lot of people who've bought electric cars are wanting. Yeah. And I think it's really good that there is a lot of public awareness and demand that we try and work this out in a different way. I mean,
and all eyes are on big mining companies now. You saw what happened in Brazil, the tailings dam broke, but all eyes are on the mining companies, all eyes are on electric vehicle supply chain. So these big commodity companies that are used to mining oil or copper or coal, the big buzzword now is lithium or graphite or nickel or cobalt are the electric vehicle stroke energy storage raw materials. So what's happening, this is the downstream of EVs. You guys buy and use electric vehicles. But what's happening in this room now is defining not just the battery space, but big mining, big oil companies, and this is the future, really.
Because I mean, are you seeing? Because presumably, then it's big global corporations that will hire you to do analysis of different topics. Yeah. Are you seeing any shift in that of who is interested? I mean, presumably, would be minerals extraction, big mining companies, those sort of people. I mean, is there other people that suddenly seeing there's something shifting?
Yeah, good tee up. So Traditionally, our customers would be mining companies, battery companies, electric car guys that need price data, market data on the supply chain. But of the last 18 months to 2 years, we start getting oil companies coming to us, and very quickly, overnight, they're our biggest customers. Like in terms of an information perspective, like subscribers. So they are listening. It's an educational thing at the moment.
And they're not asking for information about oil supplies or where there's oil wells or oil fields. It's
all about this.
It's all about that. Right.
Because the growth is ridiculous. Even if you say electric vehicles will be half as successful as anyone expects, the impact on the supply chains and mining is still absolutely huge. It's still we say it's not an evolution, but it's a revolution in the way these raw materials are produced.
Right.
Yeah. And also from my side, I mean, the investors that I speak to and companies I speak to, I mean, it's very, very diverse. So it's not just investors that want to invest in the right Asian battery stock, for example. Very much it is owners of the big oil stocks that are worried about how quickly oil demand is going to decline.
Right.
And also for the big car makers, what is the impact from this? What is the challenge of competition from electric vehicles? What is this transition from combustion engines to electric vehicles? What does that mean for their profitability and their stock? So, I think the interest is very, very broad looking at this. This debate about electrification of mobility is extremely broad, and it touches on so many industries, tech industry, autos industry, the energy industry more broadly. And it's very, very diverse.
And that's a good point. And the debate about electric cars is over. No one doubts whether, in the industry we deal with, no one doubts whether electric cars will happen anymore. It's just a question of scale and speed.
Right.
It's more a question of when and how than if.
Right.
I think there's still a lot of debate on how quickly it will happen.
Yeah.
But I agree, about 18 months ago, I think there was still...
over, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, there was still a debate up until about 18 months ago of will EVs actually is it actually going to happen?
Right.
Meaning, is it going to be ever more than 2-3% of the market?
Right.
Now, I think that has kind of mostly died away.
Yeah, that is an interesting shift. I mean, I've sensed it, even with the attitudes of the general public, is that's that last 18 months something happened.
Well, look at this event as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's it's good bellwether.
Yeah.
I just want to get that, because I'm sure there's a lot, there's a lot of people who want to ask a lot of questions. So for those of you who haven't seen this before, this is the roving microphone.
Like this.
It is padded, it won't seriously injure you. I'm not a very good thrower. It's very soft. If you want to ask a question, you just speak into the little square on the top. But your hand, madam, shot up so rapidly. I'm going to try and, get ready. This could go anywhere. It'll go near you.
It's one for YouTube, Twitter.
Thank you. Can I ask about recycling the batteries we have got? Because we have got to get away from a linear economy to a circular economy. And we have all got those old phones, toothbrushes, laptops and whatever. What's the potential to using the minerals from
there are
those?
already companies that are recycling these batteries. There's two in China, Umicore here in Belgium, in Europe. And so it's happening, and it's definitely doable. The biggest problem recycling batteries has right now is there's not enough batteries to recycle.
Yeah.
That is the biggest problem. It's not that it's not economical to do. It's doable. They've found the process to do it. It's just it needs to be scaled to get the cost down, but you can't scale it up if you're only recycling a few batteries. And these phone batteries are very, very small. So the amount of materials you get from the phone batteries obviously is nowhere near as much as what you get from a car. And so if you think about the acceleration of demand in electric vehicles having just starting to accelerate now, globally it's just barely 2% of cars sold were electric last year. And typically the cars will be driven for about 12 years. So in order to get significant volumes, we're looking at 10 years down the road really before it's really significant volumes. So I don't think that recycling is a major issue. It just takes time for that demand to grow, but I think it will happen.
Yeah.
Can I ask a supplementary question? Isn't it about our connection systems? Is it partly that where does our e-waste go at the moment, or our battery waste? Is it an issue that our councils can't collect or facilitate that? Is that part of the problem?
100%. It's a major part of the problem. Supply of batteries is one, like supply of, let's say, enough of a similar format batteries, so these recyclers know what they're going to receive, and also know what the minerals are inside of it, like the chemistries. That's becoming more standardized in the industry, so that will mean recycling 2023 onwards, when this supply comes to the end of life in EVs, is going to boost the recycling industry. But another major part is collection. Is actually, and this is the debate that's going on with automotive companies at the moment, is who is responsible for your electric vehicle comes to end of life, who's responsible for the battery at the end of that? Is it the car company? Is it the consumer? Is it the council? That's something that the debate is still working it out, so it's a really valid point that you bring up.
I think the thing is, particularly, I know what you're saying in a sense that, because I've got a little box of tragic old cell phones, and I've just kept it because I can't. What am I going to do with them? And that, as you said, that is in its total battery content is very small. But once you've got a car battery, which is huge, it will be a centralized recycling system. I think the other point is, which is why we wanted the guy from Renault, is that Renault have got all this technology they've developed to give second life to their car batteries, which are now just starting to come through. But it's all sort of held up because they haven't got any batteries, because they're still in the cars and they're still being used in the cars, because against all predictions from, say, 10 years ago, the batteries are lasting longer. And Nissan have just done a released research where they're saying their batteries are going to last longer than the car. So the car will be falling to bits, but the batteries will still be fine, And that side of it is. There's one quick thing, because I remember hearing at the conference that there was some talk of the materials that they were taking out of when they did recycle lithium-ion batteries, that the materials were actually better the second time around.
In some cases,
there's been some weird case.
Pure when you recycle them. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I think also, just one last comment on this. I think China is doing a little bit better job on this. Because the way that the government works in China, they
make a decision and it happens.
Yeah. And so they're kind of more forcing through this issue, and so you're starting to see a little bit more of this happening. It's not so much cars though; it's really still phones and laptop batteries. Yeah. And so there's a couple of companies in China that are doing that right now.
Sadly, we've got such limited time. We can try and do a couple more questions. Let's get a young man there. So if you can jettison or pass or just throw it as far. Yes, it'll get to someone. Look at that, beautifully caught, sir. Thank you. Boom.
Hello.
2/3 of our world's supply of lithium is in South America, like Bolivia and Colombia. The chemicals used to mine can be quite harmful to the environment. So, are there any solutions to mining lithium?
No.
That was quick.
Next question. No, you're right. So actually, lithium, it's important to distinguish where lithium is produced, where the mines are active and it's coming out of the ground, and where it's still in the ground, there's no operating mines. So the main countries in the world that produce lithium are Chile, so South America, as you mentioned, and Australia. Bolivia has a lot of lithium in the ground, but it's never come out of the ground. It's more politicized in that country. But the answer is all batteries for us, especially for batteries used in mobile technology, have to store a lot of energy and they have to be light. And lithium is the perfect technology for that. So any future battery technology for cars will be lithium-based for the foreseeable future. And the answer is you've got to get lithium out of the ground to do that. So any social issues they have, this is one of the biggest challenges for the companies that extract lithium.
So we need to keep making them aware that we know what they're doing. I mean, I think that's the important thing as well, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like they are aware. They're kind of aware that there's this noise going on.
Yeah, I mean, can I just make one other comment here? Because I think the title of this talk is about sustainability, and we didn't actually even talk so much about CO2 impact.
Yes, sorry, that was my first question, which I didn't look at.
And I just wanted to make a quick comment on that, because I think it is important, because I think there are some from the car industry that are trying to say that EVs are not better for the environment. I think there is a narrative from some people saying that, but we spent quite a bit of time researching this, and it's just not right. you have to, if you take the real extreme worst case possible of building your battery using coal-fired, like an old coal-fired power station, and shipping the pack around the world and counting all those CO2 emissions, then an EV is not particularly much better than a combustion engine. If you take the absolute worst case,
all right, but it's not that much worse when it comes out of the factory, right? Which is the argument that's always used. They're filthy when they come out of the factory.
It's not worse. It's not worse. It's not that much better.
No.
But in almost all cases, EVs are significantly better for the environment. It does depend on where you're making the battery, where you're making the cathode, how far you're shipping it. And where you're driving it. And so in the UK, a large portion of energy is CO2 free from nuclear, wind and solar. And so Nissan Leaf, for example, if you drive it within about 1.5 to 2 years of an average driver, you would have reached break-even CO2 versus combustion engine.
Right.
And the average life is 12 years for a car. So it's a fraction of the CO2 impact from a combustion engine in UK.
Right.
But since day one, electric vehicles, like, you had all these arguments. First it was like, they're for eco-warriors and they're not very good for the environment, and that was the first kind of argument. Then it was, well, a number of other things. But I think the automotive companies now are realizing electric cars are just better cars.
Yeah.
It's as basic as that. And now they're saying they're too expensive to produce. So that's why it's never going to happen. And the reality is, well, battery costs are crashing, and they keep on coming down.
And that is a fact. They are still getting cheaper.
Yep.
The cost of
unbelievable. The last 12 months has been an unbelievable drop. Now batteries are being produced by one or two producers at under $100 per kilowatt hour.
Right.
And that was seen as a barrier. But my point is that these improvements, the battery industry hasn't even really got started yet.
Yeah.
And that's driving the cost down. But my point is that now they're realizing they're going to be cheaper and they're going to be better than combustion engine. And really, it's game over from that point. So how do you then change your business model for the 21st century? And we're going through that now.
Yes.
Yeah, faster, cleaner, better, and they soon will be cheaper as well.
Right. Yeah. Let's do one more question. I just think I should try and get someone from over there, but if there's no one putting their hand up, this gentleman at the front is very good. If you can, you'll be really good at that. Oh, look at that! Brilliantly thrown, almost brilliantly caught.
On the other side of battery technology, when they are building new cars, are they taking into account the whole life costing, not just the cost of engineering and replacing the parts? Nobody is thinking about maintenance. Is that type of thinking involved in battery parts?
Yeah, so the electric vehicle, you've got very, very few moving parts. Maintenance costs are much, much less. That is a fact, and I think that's possibly one of the reasons why some dealerships may not want to sell them, because they're not going to get as much traffic of customers coming back to them. But so absolutely, that is an advantage of electric vehicles. Lower maintenance costs, less things need to be changed, and they should theoretically actually last longer as well.
Yeah, and the Model 3 is a perfect example of absolute simplicity of a vehicle from a production standpoint. So if you look at the Model S, they use 60% less copper in the Model 3, because instead of having wires that go into every outlet where the bulbs are, or copper wires that go throughout the whole car, they go to one central unit. So absolutely, your point is valid, and Model 3 is the perfect example of that.
And I think this is a real key problem for the traditional automotive industry, and it's gradually being admitted, because I kind of worked it out after I'd had an electric vehicle for sort of 5-6 years, and I went, oh, I suppose I should service it. I mean, it had never occurred to me. And then I went, oh yeah, I used to service cars every 6 months, and it cost hundreds of pounds each time. You just don't do it. So what that means is it affects, so they sell you a car, and then that's it.
What's the MOT like?
The MOT, well, it had MOTs every year after 3 years, and it just went through them. I don't even know. A bloke up the road, Paul, who swears even more than me, would come in, swear, drive it off, come back, and it had an MOT certificate on the passenger seat, and that was it. And it had done it. I don't know. I didn't do anything. I mean, I didn't even wash it. Anyway, really sadly, we've got to cut it there. I'm so sorry, because this is a fascinating discussion. I just want to warn you that these two guys are going to be on Fully Charged show soon, because I really want to interview you, because it's amazing stuff you're saying. Really impressive. Thank you. Give them a big round of applause. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to this amazing chat about ethical and recyclable battery technology, and more talks will be released very soon. So please leave us a 5-star rating and review on whatever you got this podcast from, and it really helps us spread the message of modern energy and sustainability, electric vehicles, renewable energy, all that stuff. It's a really big topic that's expanding at exponential rate. Check us out on the socials, and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast or our YouTube channel and our second YouTube channel, Fully Charged Regen. Yes, there's quite a few things to subscribe to these days, but it's all free, so it doesn't matter too much. And as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.